You are the very first conference in India I've had the honor of speaking
Absolutely.
with. So
Thank you.
hopefully
Thank you.
someday we'll make it an adventure and I'll be able to join you in person.
I sincerely hope so. Yeah, I actually attended the first session, live session that I attended was your CIDM conference keynote address this year.
Mm.
And I was just blown away. And then you talked at Button as well. So I'm like, I've been listening to all the podcasts and stuff. So I was really like, so impressed that this is the first person in our field that I have seen revise something that after 10 years because she has learned. And the biggest the biggest trait in you that makes me respect you so much is that learning power that you have even today. So many people quote you. They are like, Kristina approves this definition. And they are the thought leaders in our mind.
Yeah.
And when they do that,
Like a little bit of pressure, I'm not going to lie to you.
No, but then when that happens, like, the content strategy UK quotes you and Nozopina quotes you, I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to talk to her. And then I got all jittery.
Excited to talk to me. I'm always just like, it's going to take you about 2 minutes to realize that I am just as big of a nerd as everybody else in this field. And that's why we all love each other so much. It's great. But thank you. Those are very kind words.
So I wanted to take this opportunity to tell all the participants about brain traffic a little. If you haven't really shown much interest in content strategy till now, even as a content designer, you should be visiting braintraffic.com and you should be seeing all the content there. Listen to some podcasts, whichever topics you feel are closer to your work or closer to your temperament, go through those, and then you'll realize what Kristina is bringing to the table. I'm sure you'll get at least, some food for thought for the next 2 years at least. So that's
settle in. It's a lot to do.
Yeah. So yeah, Kristina, you were going to introduce us to content strategy initially in like 10-15 minutes. Can we start with that then?
Yeah, sure. Well, you had, when we chatted earlier this week, you had asked me to share a couple of very specific slides. And I think what I'd like to do first is kind of begin by talking a little bit about what strategy is, because, we can argue for years about whether content is the right word and should we be using it, and does it devalue the importance of this material that we work with, this substantive information, instructive, entertaining content. And while that's all fine and good, I sort of feel like content is the word that we're stuck with, right? This is what we have. And I've been inviting people for a decade. If you come up with something different, please let me know. But we work with content. The part of content strategy that I have found people struggled with over the years, and that I myself spent quite some time wrangling with, is the strategy piece. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about how we see strategy at Brain Traffic. Before I do that, I just realized my children have various electronic devices plugged in, just in the other room, and they're all turned on. And they're going to start going off any minute. So if everybody can smile and entertain the audience for about 8 seconds, I have to go turn those off.
So in the chat window, by the way, you can just start typing your comments, observations, anything, not just your questions. Your questions will be in the Q&A, I think. And I'll make sure that I take notes of everything and I pass it on to Kristina later. And of course, some of the questions won't be answered today because we are already running a little tight on schedule. So just do let me know those questions also.
Don't worry, I'll pack in a bunch. Okay, so I believe that I'm going to share my screen now.
Yes.
Okay, let's see. Share screen. Share keynote. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Great. And do we see a bear likely out in one of our beautiful national parks?
Yes.
So let's pretend that you're a bear. And everybody just close your eyes and get into your bear zone. And as a bear, you have a few very basic things in life that you require. Shelter, liquids to stay hydrated, and of course, food. So as a bear, you have a couple of different options in order to procure food. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me be clear that to eat in this instance, to like gain nutrition, that's going to be our goal as the bear. That is our end state, is to be full, to be fed. So let's say then you're thinking, okay, I'm a bear, I got to eat, and I've got a couple of different options. I can go foraging in the forest for whatever bears eat in the forest. I can go to a local campground and see if I can't find some unsuspecting folks who have left their food outside of their tent. In this instance, what the bear has chosen, the path to reach the bear's goal, is the bear has gone down to the river and is going to try to procure food in the river. So this is the strategy. This is the path that the bear has chosen to achieve its goal. So once it reaches the river, there are a variety of ways in which it can procure this fish. And in this instance, what the bear has chosen to do is wade into the river, stand up at the top of the waterfall, and open its mouth and wait for the fish to jump in its mouth. And so this is the tactic that the bear has chosen: to walk into the river, open its mouth, wait for the fish to jump in. So the goal is to be fed, to be full. The strategy is to go down to the river to catch fish. And the tactic for catching fish is to stand at the top of the waterfall and wait for the fish to jump in your mouth. So when we are talking about strategy, if in this scenario we actually remove the strategy piece, then what we are left with is our goal and our tactic. And in this instance, you might as well go wander down into a field and sit in the middle of the field and wait for fish to jump into your mouth. And this is what I see so often with organizations who are trying to make choices around whether it is the content they're going to create, how they're going to better manage content, how they're going to facilitate partnerships with folks across the organization. Instead of choosing a specific path to meet their goal, it's a lot of one-off tactics. Oh, let's publish a bunch of blog posts. Oh, let's go in and audit all of our content on our website to see what we can come up with. Oh, let's change all of our PDFs over to text HTML documents, just because we heard we should, without really identifying the path with how we're going to get there. So that becomes a danger. Nobody wants to be this bear in the field. So then if we move over into actually talking about the field of content strategy, we have wrangled at Brain Traffic for 12 years to talk about, because content strategy, as you well know, in India is an ever moving target. It's an evolving field. And especially here in America, content marketing has very much grabbed onto the phrase content strategy, which has caused some confusion in the marketplace, especially when people are trying to hire for the role. And so this is the framework that we use at Brain Traffic to try to discuss and explain content strategy as a wider field, because it is our perspective that content strategy is the set of activities and outputs that help to connect the dots between content design and our content systems. And so I want to spend just a minute looking at those different components. So when we talk about content design here, I'm in my own way to read my things. Content design, the way that we have grown to talk about it, and that I'm really seeing evolve in the United States, is that it's the practice of creating user-centered content for digital products and services that is informed by rigorous research and testing. So the role of content designer is really on the rise here in the United States. It was established several years ago in the United Kingdom by Sarah Richards and the team at gov.uk. In that instance, it was really more of looking at creating specific content on web pages. Now we're seeing content design as something that that travels more beyond just the user experience on the website and across a content ecosystem. So let's talk, let's see, momentarily about that editorial piece. Initially, we do want to identify who our audiences are and what are we doing here, folks? And what messages, stories, or instructions are required in order to meet those audience needs or to fulfill our business goals as an organization. We want to understand what our point of view is as an organization. We also, hopefully within our organizations, have identified the brand and language standards that we need to comply with. And of course, this is going to include any translation and localization requirements across our content ecosystem. And then finally, and this is a big thing for our writers, we want to understand our voice and tone. What is the personality of our organization? What are our values? How do those come to life with the words that we choose to convey our information, stories, instructions, etc.? So then we move on to the experience component of content design, where we're talking about what are our users' actual needs and preferences as they move through the customer journey where they are encountering our content. This is really where I'd like to clarify for folks, especially within our audience, that content does not begin and end in the engagement or the awareness and engagement and comparison and research and purchase phases. That's oftentimes where a lot of our budget and our time is dedicated in our organizations. Just as critical, and I advocate for this constantly, is the onboarding piece when folks have made the purchase, the training and the learning time, of course, the support as they move through the life cycle of that product or service, and then even the archiving or retirement of their information of that product or service. That's equally important to protect our organization's integrity and brand reputation and so on. So I just wanted to make that clear. Understanding what our larger content ecosystem looks like across not only our organization, of course, but also all the different products and services where our content lives. So beyond the website, beyond the support center, beyond content that lives within our applications. Understanding our customer journeys, again, across the spectrum of their relationship with us over time. Understanding the formats that our content will take throughout the user experience. What does the design of that experience look like? Understanding how are the design patterns that live within our libraries will shape our content on mobile and beyond. And then also, this is a piece that I like to use within the discussion around experience because testing is so critically important. What metrics are we using to measure the performance of our content? So then we move into our content systems piece, and these define the architecture, components, and activities for the repeatable models and processes that also help satisfy our business requirements. This does not mean that folks working within content systems are not cognizant of or caring for our user needs. Hopefully, within business requirements, we do take our user needs just as seriously as our need to make and save money over time. So when we are talking about structure, we want to understand how are we organizing our content on the front end user experience for people to be able to browse and find our content. We want to understand which metadata is most intuitive for our users so that if they are using our internal site search function, the results that come up are actually relevant to their needs and expectations. internal site search is one of the most broken experiences on any website that I've encountered. And so this is a thing I think especially that our audience can be advocating for over time. How will we categorize that content for efficient management? This is, I call, making our content machine friendly. How will we structure our content for reuse across channels and platforms? This is especially important when we're talking about the act of personalization and what are the requirements for personalization and dynamic delivery of our content. So structure within the content strategy arena is a huge field of practice that I'm really excited about how it is evolving. And I can't wait to see where it goes. So then finally, we have the process piece. And it really depends on the maturity of the organization, whether or not content strategists are invited to be a part of designing and defining the content process. But it's becoming more and more critical over time, especially as the complexity of content requirements and the breadth of opportunity for how our content can contribute to our business needs and goals continues to expand. So understanding how will content move throughout its life cycle, all the way from someone saying, hey, I think we need some content, through when it is archived or deleted. Understanding what tools we're going to use to create, deliver, and maintain that content, and what the requirements are that we're using to make choices about those tools. Understanding how and when we care for our existing content. And then finally, as part, I sort of summarize what we call content governance in this little phrase: who gets to say no? Who gets to say we are not going to be creating that big bucket of content? We are not going to be uploading these 10,000 PDFs to our website just because we can. Who is making those decisions? So that, in a nutshell, is how we talk about content strategy at Brain Traffic, and how I find the topic can really begin to resonate with folks over time. That we are, oh, I'm sorry, this has been updated from systems design to content systems. So just imagine that's what it says in your mind. So we're using the core of content strategy when we choose the paths that we're taking within these components to help us define the content we're going to create or focus on if it's already existing content, prioritize our initiatives with that content, work to integrate content, topics, types, voice, tone, etc., across all the different touch points of the customer journey, systematize our activities and our models and the categorization that we're using for content across our platforms and channels, and then measure content's performance. So that is how we talk about content strategy at Brain Traffic. I'll stop my share now.
So Kristina, the first question that comes to my mind is that why did you feel like transforming the quad? Of course, when you did that, and now when you say content systems, I immediately start understanding that, okay, this is IA, this is content strategist. So that's definitely, progress. But then maybe people would want to know why you have transformed the content squad. What were your observations while transforming the content strategy quad?
Mm-hmm. Really, there were a couple of different reasons. I would say the first of which is seeing the kind of the great divide between content marketing and the work that was happening there and the focus on more content, as well as the deepening of content design within the field of user experience, really led us to want to kind of bring those two pieces together to continually help people to understand, look, it's not somebody makes the words and then somebody designs the words into the web page. We've got to continually bring that partnership together, which is what my whole book in 2009, Content Strategy for the Web, which seems like decades ago, was really about: elevating the role of the person who was defining and creating and caring for content to the role of the designer, of the person delivering the code. Because you can't design a good user experience for bad content. It's impossible to do. Content will break the user experience over time. So we really wanted to get beyond just sort of talking about this, because previously we talked about the substance and the structure. But because of how the practices were evolving and the rules, we felt we wanted to kind of align with that a little bit more. We did bring structure down into the systems piece because we were also seeing the field of what I actually refer to as content engineering, which is a term that was coined by Joe Gollner forever ago, but determining how we're going to build our content systems to make sure the content goes and works the way that we need it to within our teams and organizations. And we wanted to be, and that practice is indelibly tied to our process and content operations. And so we really wanted to bring those together. So it really had less to do with, oh, the more we think about content, the more we think it's like this, and more to do with kind of continually reflecting the evolution of the field. And in fact, something that has been a little bit of a struggle for me over the last couple of years is that even content strategy as a function, I think can and should sit throughout these different areas of, content, if you want to call it operations, because the role has flexed so much. So I tend even more to talk about like the world of content and then the role of content strategy or the content strategist throughout these different areas of practice.
Sure. So you touched upon some of the answers maybe for Paresh's question. Paresh is asking, tell us about your personal journey and about founding Brain Traffic. What made you found Brain Traffic?
Yeah, so the day we had, as you may know, we had just a horrible experience here. I'm sorry to start off with a terrible topic. In 2001, we had 9/11. And I went into work, everyone was just completely dazed and horrified. I went into work the day after 9/11 and was informed that our company was concerned about what would happen with the economy and that I was being let go. And so I found myself with no job in the middle of an economy crash, and no one was hiring. And so I really decided I needed to kind of take my core skill set and go out on my own. And my core skill set was writing for websites. It was really that content design piece, even though nobody was calling it that at the time. And so I founded Brain Traffic in 2002 as just myself as a web copywriting services firm. And as we grew over the years, as I began to hire employees and our website projects got larger, I found a repeated pattern where we would be called by these big fancy companies and big fancy agencies to create the content at the very end of the website design process. So we would be pulled in and everybody would be in a huge panic, and we'd be handed this long list of content requirements and told to go and write the content. And of course, we'd sit down as a team and immediately come up with 100 questions that we had about this content. When we went back, nobody could answer them. And so it was really came down to, look, we need to be in the project process much earlier to ask these questions about content that no one else has the purview or perspective to consider, because they haven't been on the front lines and in the trenches making content happen for websites. So I thought I put on my business card, interactive content strategist. And I thought that I had made this term up and, that people would take me more seriously. And mostly people just didn't know what I did. But then in 2007, I happened upon an article by a woman named Rachel Levinger that was called Content Strategy and the Philosophy of Data. And I was like, oh, it's a thing. And so very quickly thereafter, we shifted our core services to content strategy. And I was able to, this was right around the advent of social media as well. So I was able to network with the very few other content strategists that I could find, people calling themselves that in the United States. I think I found 20 total on LinkedIn, 20 people calling themselves content strategists. And we all gathered together in 2009 at a conference to talk about what it meant to us and what the field was. And that was kind of when I think the coalition and the rise and the movement began. And then I wrote Content Strategy for the Web in 2009, less because I felt like I was some big authority and more because the book didn't exist and I wished it did. So that's my story.
Yeah,
And then
so
it's been a roller coaster since then, because content strategy, especially with content marketing, has, done this over the years, and trying to stay caught up with the conversation and participate in the community has been a challenge and a real joy.
wow. So essentially, first you need a kick in the behind, and that's when you start something new.
Sometimes you have to get, as we say in America, you have to get thrown into the cold end of the swimming pool.
Yeah, true. That's exactly what I was thinking. So I hope, Paresh, you got your answer. I'll move on to the next questions. One question we have for you is, what are the most complex and most frequent content problems that you had to fight so far?
100% to do with people. Every single time we will hear that from content strategists over and over again. Any content problem is actually a people problem. And it has to do with anything from lack of clear roles and responsibilities within an organization, understanding who is doing what and who gets to say no and where the standards live. Making sure that someone is appropriately allocating time and resources to get the content done on a regular basis. Territorial battles within organizations. I know everybody can feel the pain of that's what I want to have happen, but my boss says this has to have happen, even though my boss doesn't understand what's required there, or this team within my organization thinks they can just throw content requests over the wall and then I'll just get them done. And then also territorialism. Well, I think that my information is most important and that's what should go on the homepage of our website. Or, I created the guidelines for our voice and tones a decade ago, and so I should be able to, say what goes here, even though I've moved on in my role. It's almost never to do with even when we're brought in and people say we have, again, I'll pick on a website. We have a website with 300,000 pages and we want you to audit the content. We want to start with auditing the content. That's not going to fix anything. We can begin to figure out who owns content, what their thoughts and requirements are, and bring them into the process so that it is a learning opportunity for everyone within those teams. So that would be my answer.
Yeah, great. So when you talk about content strategy, and very aptly you gave this example, 3,000 pages, maybe multiple writers own those pages, and they would be the real decision makers about the future of those pages. So as a manager or as an organization, we are always struggling with the engineering to writer ratio. So if as a manager, I feel that my team is really good, my team has great content designers and writers, do I really need a content strategist?
Yep, that is a great question. I will give you the answer. It depends. Everybody wants to know what is the ideal structure for a content team. And it always depends on the size of your organization, what your products and services are, who is already working there, what kinds of structures and teams you already have set up, and then where leadership intends to take you over time. So in this instance, if you are, for example, a small company and you have, one or two digital products, for example, and a website that talks about them, including a support section, you may not need a content strategist. What you may need is a very savvy content designer and a really great UX writer, for example. And those two folks are working across the different platforms together. And so they understand how all the content comes together, what the relationships are, et cetera. So in that instance, all of these folks, these roles, these titles may be doing content strategy activities, which again, I'm not going to fight for what is content design and what is content strategy in that instance, because it really just all comes together around sort of a set of practices and principles and what the different roles are and who is responsible for playing those roles. And I will also say, and this is a conversation I have been having lately, just because your job title is, let's say, content designer or content support, just because that's your job title doesn't mean that you don't play a variety of roles within your organization. So that's important to remember as well. It's my opinion that the larger and more complex content systems become within an organization, and requirements and players and so on, that having the role of a content strategist who can be overseeing or at least aware of the different activities between the teams who are responsible for designing and creating and testing and managing content is very, very important, because otherwise those connections break. And when the connections break within an organization, they also break across the customer journey, because the customer doesn't care where the content is coming from. They expect to get what they need when they need it in clear language, that's consistent with voice and tone across their customer journey. And so in that instance, I do believe that we need to be elevating the role of a content strategist who can be assisting with setting those guidelines, making sure they're communicated to everyone, providing ongoing opportunities for sharing, learning, critiquing, constructive feedback, and then also advocating for the needs of the content teams throughout the organization in different areas of leadership.
True that. Now that you mention UX writer, Priyanka has a related question. She asked, what do you think is the role of a UX writer in the whole spectrum of content design? And how can writers get a seat at the table where content strategy is being decided?
Yep. So this is, for a decade, that is the number one question that I have been asked over and over. How do I get a seat at the table? And the proverbial table in this instance is really, how can I be brought into the conversation early enough so that I can be asking smart questions and sharing perspectives that will help shape requirements moving forward. That's really what we are talking about, is being involved in those early conversations. So let me tackle that question first, and then I'll talk about what I see as the role of the UX writer. The only way to elevate your role within an organization is self-advocacy. And that happens at a couple of different levels. It happens at the team level, where you are being very assertive about, may I be included in this conversation? Oh, I heard this meeting was happening. I thought I'd just stop by and sit in and see what was happening. I heard that this meeting existed, or that this meeting happened. I feel that I could, I have some feedback or some questions I would love to introduce into the conversation. So just continually, calmly, repeatedly, coming to the table, and don't get mad if you don't get invited, just keep at it. And then the second piece of self-advocacy is reaching out and making connections with leadership. So whether it is your manager, your manager's peers, asking your manager, or if you have a mentor within the organization, to connect you with other leaders, and continually talking about, not here's what content strategy is, or content, UX writing, and here's why it's important, but I noticed these challenges, or I noticed these opportunities within our organization, and I believe that there are some activities or perspectives that I can bring to the table, and here's how they would help us to meet or solve those opportunities and challenges. So it requires patience, it requires diplomacy, it requires, I think, a very positive outlook. A challenge that I have had kind of as a leader in the field is when I continually see people complaining about how nobody respects them. And I'm just like, look, you can either, change the way that you are advocating for yourself, or you can go find another job. Like, don't, just saying, oh, nobody likes me, nobody understands what I do. That's not anybody else's fault. We need to be responsible for shaping and driving that conversation. And that does require a degree of positivity and optimism and confidence. So that's the first piece. The second piece, understanding the role of the UX writer. In my mind, I have to write a blog post about this. I've had to for about a year. I have 2 kids. They take a lot of my time. I love them very much. But I really see there's this continuum in relationship where if you think about content strategy, that is, I've said a million times, overseeing and connecting the dots between different kinds of content across platforms, channels, services, and products. We have the content design role, which is doing the research and working and helping to kind of like identify content requirements across the user journey. And then we have the UX writer role, which is actually bringing those requirements to life in the design process, where we're creating the content, testing the content, iterating the content, but very closely collaborating with our designers and our developers to bring that content experience to life. And I'd like to be very clear, that doesn't mean that only the UX writer can write and only the content designer can write and only the content one person can be playing all these different roles. But my concern with the rise of the UX writing discipline or job, I guess I should say, is that I don't want people to think that it is a thing that they can learn in a vacuum as a standalone skill outside of content design, outside of content strategy. If you are going to set yourself up for a long and satisfying career in content creation and production and management, design, etc., you need to be able to have an informed conversation about content design and content strategy as well, and be excited and curious about those fields.
True. So don't get restricted or get defined by others, and just unleash your own potential. That's true. And you also mentioned about cross-channel content. So Ram's question is around that. He's stepping onto the minefield of building a unified content strategy involving tech docs, marketing, training, and field services using a single CCMS. Am I nuts?
Are you? A, are you by yourself? And B, how big is your organization? No, I think that the important thing, no, you're not nuts. You're brave and courageous, and I salute you for your ambition. My opinion is that it is very important to know where to begin when you are starting to talk about a unified content strategy. And I think that a place that a lot of people want to begin is maybe to like hold a workshop and begin to understand, okay, what do people think about content? What do people need with content? What are their requirements around content? Because then people want to jump very quickly from that conversation into the doing, right? And that's the bear. They want to talk about what their goal is, and then they want to go, run to the nearest place and sit there with their mouth open and hope that things will begin to happen. Typically, my recommendation is to do what I call a listening tour first, and to go around and begin to ask people, where their pain points are, where their opportunities are, what content they own, what has been working, what hasn't, and really start there internally, listening individually to folks. And that can take a very long time, depending on where you work and how many folks are involved. But this is also a fantastic time to begin to create those alliances. I always talk about doing internal stakeholder interviews isn't just about getting information, it's also about building trust and making sure that people are heard. So if you can build that foundation, that is a critically important foundation for your process. I think the second piece would be doing some kind of an ecosystem mapping. And there's a brilliant series on the Brain Traffic blog that was written by a former employee, Scott Kuby, and in fact, if you look up content ecosystem map, this series will come up first on Google. And that is a very deep dive series on how to the purpose of a content ecosystem map, how to create one, when to involve people, and kind of that is a good workshop, not just what do you want, but how does content work and live within our organization. And then I think the third piece of it is to begin to surface guidelines and principles and shared expectations so that you can create kind of a North Star framework for this is where, sorry, sometimes when I introduce English idioms, I'm not sure if they make sense. North Star is like a kind of guiding light or guiding principles for our teams that we can all come together around. Yes, our content is primarily created for our user, our customer, our audience. Yes, we want to create content that maintains integrity over time. Yes, we want to have you make sure that we're using plain language to reach the largest audience possible and improve their level of satisfaction and confidence. So those are kind of the three key pieces that I would encourage you to begin with versus, and this is another problem, I'm not going to lie, about having the second edition of Content Strategy for the Web came out in 2012, and I haven't written a new book since. Again, see children. But this is a challenge too, is that 9 years ago almost, we told people you want to start with a content audit. That is not what we tell people anymore, because we found too often that people were like, okay, I just have to start with the stuff. When in fact, most of the time you do need to start with the people.
True. This question and answer, this conversation actually reminded me how I was in awe with people who were talking about, somebody should be at the level of CXO from content side, and they were talking about designations like CSO. And here we are wondering about like, who exactly is the content strategist and how do I begin my career in content strategy and stuff like how do I groom myself in content strategy. So
Yeah, well,
question is actually quite on the same lines. She asks, what are your thoughts on applying content strategy at the organizational level, or rather at the tech writing team level, especially when org level strategy is not in my area of control, as I am a tech writer responsible for writing for a specific product.
Sure. So here, let's see. So again, I would suggest that your ability to evolve within your organization is going to be either constrained by or opened up by your current organization structure. So if there is a content strategy function within your organization, the best way for you to move into it is starting to ask around. What kind of skills do I need to begin to build up? When would, what other responsibilities would I need to assume prior to embracing that role? I really, when it comes to kind of as content strategy exists within most organizations, I have never seen the leap made from tech writer straight to content strategist. There's always, you've got to be a manager on the team, or you need to have been collaborating very closely with other people throughout the organization on specific products or specific content products or services. But again, I'm a little bit scrambling because I'm not sure what your current organizational structure is. If you'd like to begin to advocate for content strategy at the organizational level, building those internal relationships is by far the most important. That's the first thing. The second thing is to deeply immerse yourself in the literature and the podcasts and any online training opportunities and online conferences that you're here. That you can, so that you can really be educated about navigating that conversation when you do sit down with these folks. And the number one important thing that you can do as you build these relationships is to ask questions. The more people feel heard sitting with you, the more they will perceive you as more of a consultant or it's kind of funny because people will actually find you a smarter thinker if you are doing more listening in the conversation than talking and asking very good questions. So I realize this is a little esoteric, I guess, to just continually coming back and saying you've got to build those relationships, but without creating those alliances within an organization and across different functions, you're never going to be able to assume any kind of a strategic role, because strategy, again, is about connecting those dots, not only between pieces of technology, but also the people who are making choices about that technology and using them day to day, for example.
That's a very good point. True. Bhavna asks, can you share some real life examples or use cases where having a content strategy in place helped companies deliver docs in a better way?
Mm-hmm. So I will come back to, in this instance, I will come back to content strategy as a framework of guidelines and principles, as well as designed repeatable processes. So in terms of guidelines and principles, if you are able to implement a content strategy that helps to prioritize the kind of content that's being created and how you're identifying it. So, I mean, very, very basic, for example, okay, we have 80 support articles that we should be creating this quarter, but we're going to map that against the phrases that are being used on our internal site search engine, as well as the most visited and responded to articles, as well as the questions that are coming in via our call center, and use that data to inform our choices, and not just whoever's yelling the loudest across the hallway, right? Or on the Zoom call in this instance. Those are all principles and guidelines that can be set within a content strategy framework. How are we making decisions about where to focus and prioritize our initiatives? And I have seen that be extremely helpful in, well, you're asking me for specific use cases. I guess I've seen that be extremely helpful within financial organizations. Especially, I think there's a healthcare organization that we have worked with in the past who has really, really used specific search words and conversations with their call center to elevate certain support articles and Q&A and so on within their logged in website. So that's been very helpful. I think creating and continually training on language standards and guidelines, I have seen especially useful for global enterprises who are dealing with translation and localization. In that instance, the content strategy team has set these guidelines, and they're responsible for ongoing training, consultation, and critiques of the content. And so the people who are creating it are getting constant feedback from the strategic consultant, the content strategists within the organization. Let's see, those are two use cases. Are those helpful? Did I answer the question?
Yeah, definitely. So one question from Sachin is that you recommend banging the drum to persuade people on establishing a content strategy. Can we achieve this without internal success story, especially when different groups have to be brought together?
Without an internal success story, no. I think that, one of the core things that I have seen work over the years is when people who care deeply about the success of a content initiative or raising the profile of content within their content operations within their organizations, the most success that I have seen in growing and evolving organizations is when a few people who care about this topic, whether it's within the same team or across different teams, come together and identify. It doesn't have to be big. It can be just a small pilot project where if they apply the principles and the process of content strategy or content design or content engineering, whatever area it is that you want to focus in, and are able to show improvement that is connected either to customer satisfaction or kind of your business bottom line, and then take that story, again, no matter how small it is, and shout it from the rooftops. Put together a little package or presentation, ask for an audience with a variety of folks, and say, look, here was the problem. Here's the unique way that we came to the table to solve the problem together. Don't bore everybody with like the total ins and outs of what you did. Just generally tell the story of, if we come to these challenges through the lens of content strategy, we can get real meaningful results instead of just spinning our wheels doing the same thing that we've done over and over. Come up with ideas for content, create the content, get it out there, see what happens, forget about it, change it on the fly, and then, let it die on the vine. Really, really tell that smart story over and over. What does not work is if you are just constantly going to leadership with a nice little presentation about content strategy that shows the quad and gives a bunch of quotes and a bunch of definitions and why it might help and can I do it? No, nobody's going to care about that. Nobody cares about the quad except for us. Trust me, leadership does not want to talk about content strategy. They want to talk about outputs and results, and that's what we need to focus on.
So do you have any recommendations for someone wanting to learn this formally? Courses, workshops, any other resources?
Mm-hmm.
So basically, Kristina is going to share a few resources with all of us. So I am actually trying to choose and pick some questions accordingly.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I promised you a slide of these resources, which I remembered as I was getting ready this morning, and so I apologize, and I can put that together, but I'll give some off the top of my head. I will say that although I've changed my mind about some of the things that I've written, reading content strategy for the web is always kind of a good primer and introduction to the shape of the topics and very good basic tools and processes that you can use to improve your content. So even though it's 8 years later, which in internet time is about 100, it still holds up. So I can recommend that as a very basic kind of beginner's introduction to the topic, which maybe none of you need because you're here and you're having involved conversations. More recently, again, I can point to the brain traffic blog posts. I did have a podcast for a while that I will hopefully be rebooting in 2021 that still has a lot of really relevant conversations with people who are much smarter than I am. And so I can recommend that. And that's just at contentstrategy.com. There are UX writing courses, if you're interested in that, being taught online by an organization called the UX Writers Collective that I can really recommend. It's run by some just very deeply good people. Of course, we have Confab. I'm sorry to keep recommending my own resources. We have Confab is our conference coming up in May, and registration for that is open now at confabevents.com. And that is really that is really the sort of broadest, deepest dive that you can find in the topic of content strategy online. I also can recommend a couple of other books. Let me see now off the top of my head. The Elements of Content Strategy by Erin Cassane is a classic that I recommend to everyone. Let's see. Nicely Said is a book about kind of voice and tone that I can recommend. Any book about content from the publishers Rosenfeld Media, which is Lou Rosenfeld, the guy that wrote the information architecture book, Polar Bear book, and also A Book Apart, which was founded by Jeffrey Zeldman, who is the creator of Web Standards. Any content book within those two publishers is just brilliant and really worth owning. And they all have versions of ebooks of those. And then finally, there's another podcast hosted by a guy named Larry Swanson called Content Strategy Insights, that I can also really strongly recommend. So that's off the top of my head. And and importantly, please do go to braintraffic.com, and at the bottom of the page, sign up for our email list, because we are deep in planning for 2021, and there are some exciting training opportunities and online curriculum opportunities that if you join our mailing list, you can stay up to date on.
Absolutely. We are actually at 8:31. Rajiv, how are we placed? We are already 1 minute over.
So Kristina, if you so kindly agree to spend a couple of more minutes, we have another 15 minutes before the next session. So if you are game, we can go on for another 10 minutes.
My kids are still in bed. As long as they don't come barreling down the stairs, we're good. I'm happy to stick around.
Anyway, we have 25 open questions. I don't think we can do justice to those. But then some of these questions, I can see that, questions like, what's the difference between IA and content strategy, or how can I get started with content strategy if my organization doesn't have a content strategy? These are the questions you can easily get answered on Brain Traffic or even other resources. I don't know of other resources as much because I follow Brain Traffic more. So do look at the toolkit that Kristina's Brain Traffic offers, and that might help you in understanding the gaps that you have probably in your content strategy ideas.
Yeah,
so
I can jump in and say, to understand kind of the difference between information, or I should say the relationship between content strategy and information architecture, I can recommend that publisher A Book Apart. It's called Everyday Information Architecture by Lisa Maria Martin, or Marquis. I know she took her maiden name or her married name. So that book I can strongly recommend. And in terms of getting started in content strategy, read Content Strategy for the Web, Elements of Content Strategy. Read Content Design by Sarah Richards. And then also, I think Tori was here at this time yesterday. Be sure to get Tori's book. And then also Andy Welfley and Michael Metz wrote a really great book from Rosenfeld Media called Writing is Designing. And that is another, those books, if you can obtain those or read work by those writers, you'll be in good shape.
Absolutely. So one question I wanted to ask you, or rather I wanted you to talk about was your statement, user personas don't work because of our inappropriate assumptions. Would you like to throw some light on that? That's a very interesting statement.
Sure. I think that, for user personas to work, they need to be based on real world research and not just kind of these stories that we invent in our minds about, this would be, we always joke in America, we always joke about the soccer mom. She's in her early 40s and she drives her minivan to these soccer games all the time. And these are the kinds of workout clothes she wears. And this is the kind of coffee she drinks. And, all these, like, they bring these characters to life, but they don't do anything to help us understand what content they require to complete certain tasks on our website or within our products and services. And so a lot of times user personas might be useful as we are creating new, larger products or services like a Fitbit or an app for our iPhone. But when it comes to the role of the content strategist and the information architect and all of those roles, big stories of these people kind of talking about what they like to eat for breakfast, that doesn't inform anything for us when it comes to actually meeting their needs and expectations and preferences online or through products and services with the information and instructions that we're providing. And so the best user personas are created in order to answer very specific, useful questions, and not just so that we have, 6 people whose faces we can put on the wall and then pretend that will help guide our efforts.
True. So I think this might be the last question because it's already 8:36. So I just wanted you to, give us any advice, considering that this is a group of mostly people who are working for software industry, mostly working on product documentation. Our work generally starts with getting started or onboarding, and then goes on till support, troubleshooting and support. Is there any gap that you see in today's information development world that we should be rather focusing on to be able to create that impression of not being easily replaceable, or really being really creating content which is king? So any advice?
what I have seen in organizations where folks that are working on technical documentation, support documentation, supporting and working with engineers, is that when those folks are seen as collaborators and more strategic thinkers who are not just focused on, okay, you've identified this query and I need to put out content that answers this question, and now here it is, and I'm going to move on to the next thing. But when those folks are really asking questions about what is the mindset of the user, of whether it is a developer or someone using the software, when they come to the website or to the help center or to the chatbot with this question, what is their mindset? What is the task they are trying to accomplish? What is the problem they are looking to solve? And really seeing it through the eyes of the human being who is going to be reading that content versus just, this is a question I need to answer the way I would in a research paper, or the way I would in very technical, documentation, that where I'm mostly interested in just conveying straight data and information versus considering that information in the overall context of the user experience. Those are the folks that I see really establishing themselves as highly valuable employees, and not only thinking about it from kind of a user-centered perspective, but also the folks who are continually looking to better support and up the game of the people that they are collaborating with. The folks that I see that get really stuck in their jobs are the ones that are sort of stuck in the role of order taker, where they're just constantly getting thrown requests and they have to quickly create the content, and then they throw it back over the wall and they move on to the next thing. Those are the people that become very frustrated in their jobs, that feel undervalued, that feel like they can't move ahead. And to be frank, in some instances, that is the culture of the organization. And if you have tried to shift the conversation and you can't, either settle in and kind of accept that that's where you are, or go and look for a company that really places human experience in the center of everything that they do.
Absolutely. Don't stay an order taker at any cost, and don't be afraid of.
You don't need to. You don't need to.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And embrace the adversities, because 9/11 gave us Kristina.
That's how we're going to wrap this up.
No, Paresh actually has said that in the comments that 9/11 was good in a way because it made Kristina available to the rest of the world.
That's kind of you.
Yeah.
Sometimes tragedies bring us unexpected gifts, I guess. Like the pandemic, I'm here with you now. So there you go.
Exactly. So the more we feel challenged, I think the better job we do as individuals, and that's what we should just keep working on. Just challenge yourself, keep challenging yourself. That'll probably just put you on the right track.
And stay curious. Even more than that, be curious about the problems that you can help solve. Be curious about the skills that you don't have, or the conversations you haven't been a part of. Be curious about what's happening, especially at other organizations, which those podcasts are really good for. And just stay open. Don't ever think that you have all the answers, because that'll put you in a corner as well. Trust me.
Absolutely. There are still 23 questions, but I think we'll just have to hope that we keep the conversations going on in one way or the other. Conversations never end with a conference, so I'm really hopeful that we keep in touch with each other and we discuss issues that will help each other. And let's just keep doing that over and over again. Thanks so much, Kristina, for joining us today and spending this time with us, and being so generous.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was a real pleasure. And congratulations on your event. I know this is not an easy feat, and good work, everybody else, for hanging in there this evening. I'm so excited for your community and to see where you will continue to grow over the years.
Absolutely. A Big
Thank you so
round
much,
of applause
Kristina.
to the
From all
volunteers.
of us at STC India, a big thank you. And very grateful that you came. And through this conference, we also wanted to initiate the right conversation for user experience and content strategy. And absolutely, we couldn't have a better person than you to initiate them in the right way. So absolutely grateful to you for accepting our invite and honoring this conference. Thank you so much.
Well, it's my honor as well.
Have a great day.
Thanks. You too.